All right, so everyone's talking about how challenging the upcoming couple of years are going to be from a budget perspective. And that means you need to take control of how dollars flow out of your organization. So, how do you do that? Well, it starts with the data, and specifically data on how, where, when, and with what frequency purchases are being made all across your various departments. You may or may not have a procure to pay platform that makes it easy to measure this type of activity. But to get you inspired, you should go check out Procurify's brand new Charter School Benchmark Report. It just came out a couple weeks ago and offers 10 procurement benchmarks from charter schools across the country, highlighting things like average PO volumes, spend per vendor, items per vendor, how long it takes to go from requisition to PO, and so on. Not only will you be intrigued to answer these same questions for your school, it might also shine a light on opportunities for cost control next year. You can go to procurify.com/resources to download a copy, or check out the episode description, and we've linked to it there as well. All right, now back to the show.
Welcome to Charter School Insider, lessons from the nation's top charter school operators, the only podcast dedicated to the behind-the-scenes business of running a successful charter school. Join us as we sit down with charter school leaders who share how they are overcoming the biggest operational hurdles facing their schools today.
All right. Well, Jemia Cunningham-Elder, welcome to the Charter School Insider podcast. It's great to have you here.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
Likewise. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to the conversation. And today we're going to be talking about community and community partnerships. And so I wanted to start really with kind of the basics and ask you, in your own words, what does it mean to you for North Lawndale College Prep to be part of the North Lawndale community?
Sure. So North Lawndale College Prep is in the North Lawndale neighborhood of Chicago. And so right there, we have taken the name of the community that was there long before our school and will be there long after. We've been around for 25 years. But the idea was that our school was built specifically to serve this community. So we have the name as our school, and we serve mostly a population that comes from the neighborhood. And we are planted in the neighborhood as a community member of the neighborhood and a community member with all other organizations in the neighborhood, so that we are specifically meeting the need of the students and the families of the North Lawndale community.
And from your perspective, what are some of the distinctives of the North Lawndale community that you feel like are maybe reflected in the school? I mean, you mentioned the name is a great example, really trying to take on, we are part of this community. Are there other aspects of the North Lawndale community that you feel like are reflected in the school?
Sure. Our population, North Lawndale is a mostly Black neighborhood. Our school is a mostly Black school. The fact that most of our students and families choose North Lawndale because it is a walking distance school, or we have 2 campuses in the neighborhood that they are walking distance. And then a lot of our partners come from North Lawndale. So what's also unique about North Lawndale is the organizations that serve North Lawndale, like Lawndale Community Health Center, Lawndale Legal, a lot of places that have Lawndale in the name because they were built to serve this community. We have strong partnerships with them. And then those leaders tend to work closely with me, or they serve on our board as a kind of voice of the community for our school.
I love that. And I think I want to talk more about some of those relationships you just alluded to and how those were developed over time. Just from a kind of philosophical perspective, why do you feel like it's so important to be not just a provider of education, but really an organization that kind of lives and breathes the community? And maybe you could answer that from what happens if you're not part of the community and you're trying to develop a school.
I think if you work in the nonprofit world enough, you will hear from people being served by nonprofits that they want a voice, or that they feel like sometimes organizations will come in and have a solution to a problem.
Right.
And they will, here, we've solved your problem. And actually, if you talk to the community or people of the community, first of all, they might not even think that thing you're trying to solve is a problem. Like, you've decided that it's a problem. So that's number one, right? So like asking, is this even is this an issue? Whatever it is, right? And then two, not assuming that people of a certain community or of the community are not already trying to solve the problem, or possibly are solving what they have found to be the root cause of the problem. And this is just me speaking broadly about nonprofits and kind of mission work, right? Just throughout my career, that's what I've heard, I've experienced. I don't think anybody wants someone to come into their neighborhood, even me where I live. It's like, oh, hey guys, we're going to put this thing here and it's going to be great for you all. And I'm like, as a person who lives here, no, what about this? What about that?
Right. Nobody's asking for this. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't ask for this. And so why I think it's so important to be of the community is, well, when the school was started, it was started with the community in mind. And I know that's not true of all schools, but even if that's not true of your school, it's, well, if you're going to serve that community, do you have the right voices at the table to say, hey, this is actually what we want, or this is our root cause, or can I question or push back on this thing that as an institution you believe is the right way to go about this or the right thing to do? And do I have a voice in this because I am the one who lives it day to day?
Yeah. So I want to dig into that idea a little bit more of maybe for other leaders who are listening to this, maybe their school wasn't founded with the same vision of being part of the community, but they as a leader are trying to change that. To your point, like you're in the community, you're serving students who are coming from that community. How do you think about evaluating whether or not the community views your organization as a neighborhood school, as someone who's dedicated to the community? I guess maybe, do you have any recommendations, or maybe you could share from your own experience taking over as the CEO? Like, how did you think about, okay, how are we, our school, how is it perceived in the community? Where does that process start of evaluating where your organization stands with the audience that they serve?
That's a good question. So when I started, my first step was to make meetings with community leaders. So I started either people in similar roles to me who run other organizations, just to hear about our relationship, like our two organizations' relationships. What is the perception of us in the neighborhood? What are ways that we can come to the table in a fruitful way for the future? And I was given real feedback. And when I took over, it was post-COVID. And so those relationships had dissipated over the few years of COVID, just because town hall meetings and community meetings really weren't happening. And so what I did was I started, not just me, but some other team members, asking them to go, or I should say volunteering them that like we need to go. So we have staff members who go to certain community meetings that are held either weekly or monthly. I make sure that I am meeting with community leaders, if it's not monthly, seasonally, typically in the summer, to just say, hey, here's where we were last year. Here's where we plan to go in the future. They tell me, here's what's happening in the community that may or may not impact that. And then from there, certain projects will take place. And then another thing that I do is there are some community hubs where I try to do work, where I try to get my coffee or food, or, I will. Again, often I do this in the summer because I think, as we're talking through this podcast, if you're a leader, there are ebbs and flows, right? So it is unrealistic that I can be at a coffee shop off campus or, not in the day-to-day as much during the school year, but definitely the spring, the summer, early fall, I go to the place where I know I'm going to see people who will keep my ear to the ground.
Yeah, I think it sounds like really just an emphasis on both listening and not coming with assumptions to the community that you're serving, but also encouraging both by doing it yourself, but also getting your staff involved in places where the community is gathering, making sure that you are listening to what people have to say and showing up where people are gathering. And so I think that's a really good encouragement for others who are thinking about, how do we even get a pulse on what the community feels about our organization? If there's some potentially maybe like low hanging fruit or simple suggestions that you might have for leaders who are looking to make improvements in this area. Does anything come to mind? Like you mentioned, being intentional about meeting with the other fellow CEOs or executive directors of other organizations. Do you have any recommendations for if you're trying to make some immediate improvements, maybe especially for a new leader who comes in and realizes that this is a problem and the organization is not viewed maybe as positively? Where would you recommend someone start? Like, what are some potentially simple things that provide a lot of value in showing a renewed commitment to the community?
Yeah, I would say start with your families. If you can hold small town hall or a small, just even 5, 10 parents and get their feedback. That was one of the first things I did when we actually hired a consultant. I don't think if you're stressed for funds, you could do it yourself, but we hired a consultant to come in and do focus groups. So I was able to hear from students, families, and staff about where we needed to be in the community, where they saw kind of our stake in this. And that helped guide me on my next steps of who I needed to meet to make that a reality.
I love that. Were there any interesting, just out of curiosity, were there any interesting takeaways from those focus groups that surprised you?
Yeah, the biggest surprise and that I still live with today and keep it in the forefront is for our families, they expect us to be the hub, right? If they don't know where to turn, if something negative is going on in the community, they turn to the school. They expect that we might have an answer. I shouldn't even say might. They expect us to have an answer. They expect us to be able to respond to it. So if, let's say, even a community event, a block party, they expect that they're able to come to us, one hub, to find out what is going on in the neighborhood. It's like, okay, now that I know that, because I walked in thinking, you all just expect us to educate your kids with college prep.
Right.
And instead, they expect us to be able to say, here's where you can get turkeys for Thanksgiving. Here's where you can get gifts for Christmas. Even better if we can provide them, right? Like things like that. And then once I learned that, it became a way for me to focus my energy or some of my team's energy on things like that that are important to the community. And had I not asked that or had someone do that work with the families, I would not have known that.
Right, right. What you mentioned, like in doing this work, especially at the beginning, there's some pitfalls to avoid. At the top of the conversation, you mentioned, like, and this is just broadly speaking about nonprofits, a lot of times people will come in and have good intentions, but not actually take the time to listen to the challenges in the community or get leaders from the community to participate in the work. Are there any other kind of pitfalls to avoid that come to mind? And maybe those few that you mentioned at the beginning are the big ones, but are there any others just in evaluating, developing a community engagement strategy that you would recommend either from personal experience or just from being in the space?
Yeah, I would say do not do anything without asking. They actually have to bring it to them. And a story comes to mind where it was like, okay, it wasn't at NLCP, it wasn't my school, but it was something I learned a while back because they're like, we have this whole community plan. And then someone was like, you never talk to any of the people who live in the community.
Right, right.
And I think I wouldn't say a pitfall, but I think something that the founders of North Lawndale did really well, or North Lawndale College Prep, was they made sure that our board representation included community members. And as we're even looking at our board representation now, it's like when that was written, it was, okay, community members. But now we're even looking at what does that mean for alumni? Because when the school started, there weren't alumni. So, keep at the top of your mind that the community changes. And I would say something to avoid is assuming that your community is stagnant, that what they needed 5 years ago is what they need today. And so keeping that in the top of mind, I don't know if people need to continue to do strategic planning. I wouldn't say that as much but I do think you need to have an idea that every 3 to 5 years, do a little bit of an audit of who's on our board, who's on our team, has the community changed? when we can, we do, for specific roles, try to hire from the community. And our community, as I said, has now extended into alumni, right? So we will try to hire alumni back. We will, in the summer, have internships. We will try to place interns at other community organizations. But I just think always ask with an open mind and don't assume that you have the answer. Because, like I said, even what I thought was education, our families also care that we are the hub of information for them.
All right, so I want to move us on to the role of community partnerships and talk about some of the unique examples that you all have at North Lawndale College Prep. And before we get into specifics, I wanted to ask you about community partnerships in general. You mentioned, meeting with fellow leaders in the community. What do you recommend for where to go to develop those strong relationships? And maybe it's a question of what types of organizations are you looking for in the community? Or maybe have you found to be particularly strategic relationships that have positive impacts on the school community? Are there any particular types of partnerships that you would recommend, and maybe like what are things to avoid in community partnerships? Any thoughts on either of those before we get into specific examples?
Sure. So I will say what we have found with our population of students, and particularly post COVID, I know this is true across all schools, is the need for mental health providers is high. So we particularly look for partnerships that serve students in urban schools who have staff that know how to work with a population of students who come from lower income backgrounds and maybe deal with trauma in their lives. And so that's kind of like top of mind. And then are they able to offer like social workers or mental health solutions? But broadly, when I'm looking at partnerships, we try to evaluate the partnership's consistency, right? So I guess if you're new, it's like I started looking at, can we get a list of all of our old partners? Consistency, like, do they do the thing that they say they're going to do? Relatability to our students, because not all providers are able to meet our students' needs. And then cost. And so we say, here are the things that we need, and will this cost just operationally bring more to the table, or will it cost us more in the long run, in the sense of like, do we need somebody? So I guess this is actually a fourth bucket of like, do we need somebody to run this partnership, or can they kind of run autonomously?
Right, right. Like, are you creating the need for a whole new employee, or this is a side project that turns into a full-time job for someone, or is it self-sustaining?
Yes, because some of the best partnerships are a mix of, you have people who know our students, our community, and often they come from the community or have worked in our community long enough that we don't have to create a new role to sustain the partnership, so they can be autonomous, and that they understand our needs so much that they work with us on the cost to make sure that it is viable for our organization to keep the partnership running.
Have you found as a leader when you're meeting with other CEOs or founders of these organizations that are in the community, especially given, North Lawndale College Prep has been around for 25 plus years, what do you do? Like you mentioned, you recommended, starting with that list of all your previous partnerships and then starting to work through some of those other buckets. I would imagine that there's certain partnerships where you come in and the leader you're meeting with, maybe has a certain experience from 10 years ago that's totally different than what you're trying to accomplish with the partnership. How do you handle those situations? I guess maybe what I'm asking about is, do you find that you can revive certain partnerships and have them take on a new form, or do you feel like it's more worth the kind of time, energy, and effort to get it right on the front end and get rid of partnerships that are not serving your students best, or maybe are sucking away time and energy? Just curious if you have thoughts or perspectives on that.
I think it's, again, when I say like that, you need to make sure that you're kind of auditing even like the community. As the community changed, we also need to audit partnerships and community partnerships in the same way. Like, does that partnership still serve in the way that our school has needed? Have we graduated from that partnership? Has the partnership, and we've seen this really post COVID, some organizations have really needed to shift their focus because a need has become greater in a particular aspect that wasn't true prior to COVID. And so we just are not, we don't meet where we need to be anymore, and that's okay. And so we've had those conversations. They'll say we have to focus on this, or we just don't have a particular population anymore, or a particular class anymore that we used to. So what I like to do is have the partnership, like the partners, come in, come see the school, come meet with the leaders, particularly because the leaders are probably new, and everyone lay out, here's what we need, here's our expectation, let me show you our lay of the land. And they tell us what they can provide and if it makes sense. And if it doesn't make sense, then we say that we will check back in a year or so to see if things have changed on either end. And if not, we try to find ways for those partnerships to maybe not be long standing partners where you come every day, but maybe there's an opportunity where we're having a service project so we can bring you in, or you're having a service project and so we can send our students. And so it's like, your friends that it's like you used to work with them every day, but now they're people that you can call upon and they know they can call upon us. And that all partnerships don't have to be something that is like they're coming by weekly or daily.
Right, right. It doesn't have to be a huge complex program. It can be a strong relationship that kind of opportunistically you're able to support one another. That makes sense. I wanted to ask about a few real world examples. I have a few that I know about that you all have put into place. And I wanted to start with Peace Warriors. Could you tell us just a little bit about what Peace Warriors is, and then maybe also about what are some of the kind of community relationships that make that program, effective and continue to be a part of the life of the school?
Sure. So Peace Warriors is a nationally recognized Kingian nonviolence program. So we have students in our school who have committed to Kingian nonviolence, known as Peace Warriors, and they learn about the principles of nonviolence that came from Martin Luther King Jr. And then they dedicate themselves to upholding peace and nonviolence in their lives. And their main mission is to interrupt nonsense and interject love and kindness. And what that looks like on a daily basis is they will do condolence runs if any of our students have lost someone they love. They will throw peace celebrations in the school to, again, interject love. They will host service projects. So it's a really big deal, and it's an honor to be a Peace Warrior. They get featured on the news. They get to have, like, one of our Peace Warriors got to meet former President Barack Obama, actually sat on a
Wow,
panel with him.
that's super cool.
Yeah, it's an awesome way to incentivize peace in both internally for the students, but also externally for our student body to say, when you choose the path of peace instead of violence, fighting, or name calling, then look what you get, both internally as a person, but also externally. You might get to meet the president. And then how the Peace Warriors kind of move in our community is we send them out in the summer to teach the principals. So in the summer, they go to different organizations, different schools, they teach students and they teach the adults Kingian nonviolence. And then throughout the school year, they'll hold 2 or 3 workshops where community members can sign up and learn the principles.
I love that. I feel like the motto of interrupting nonsense and interjecting love, I feel like our entire country could use could use that motto. And, certainly what an amazing testament of those students that are carrying forward that mission. How do you feel like the community has responded to something like that? And maybe just as we're talking about sort of the role of partnerships in the life of a school, do you feel like you've seen a program like Peace Warriors draw members of the community towards the school positively? I guess what has that looked like?
I will start by saying, yes, our community members enjoy coming to the service projects and the workshops. Our goal is to make this a movement in North Lawndale and then also in the city of Chicago, in the sense that we have a large number of people outside of our school who know the principles of nonviolence, and that they also choose to interrupt nonsense and interject love and kindness. And we want it to be a student-led movement. And so the students are working on doing that by planning service days, by planning these workshops where people can come learn, and also by getting our parents involved. Because what we realize is, if your student is learning nonviolence at school, it would be beneficial for the parents to know what they're learning and how they're learning, and to do that parallel to their students.
Right. And be able to reflect that at home with the students as well. Okay, so I want to ask about another program, Phoenix Hall. Could you tell us a little bit about Phoenix Hall and specifically what partnerships or partnership in the community kind of made this initiative possible?
Sure. So Phoenix Hall was created to serve as a space for students in need of housing to be able to get to school. So it's maybe 5 blocks away from the school, and it serves almost as a dorm for youth who are in transient housing situations, and they are able to have a roof over their head and live in community and then attend school. And it started actually through a partnership with the Old St. Patrick's Church in Chicago. I think it's one of the oldest churches in Chicago, and Old St. Pat's is now what they call kind of like the West Loop, but it's on the west side. And they have an initiative called the Kinship, which is completely dedicated to serving the west side of Chicago. And through Old St. Patrick's Church, they fundraised for the Phoenix Hall, originally to serve North Lawndale College Prep students. And over the years, it has now opened up and is part of an organization called the Night Ministry. And it serves more than North Lawndale College Prep students, but with the mission of making sure that young people have a place to go at night.
Amazing. Yeah, I love just the creativity of when organizations can get together to work towards kind of shared mission. And so, certainly seems like that particular initiative, and having in that case a St. Pat's who is willing to fundraise and go to bat to make this happen. It's really amazing to see those types of partnerships and kind of the year after year impact they can have. As we come to a close, I wanted to ask if there's any current community partnerships you're working on or current projects that come to mind as it relates to the school community relationship.
Yeah, we have some really great partnerships that have grown over the years, and they're not all community partnerships per se. They're national programs, but that have started to dedicate their time and self. I think what we do well at NLCP is saying, hey, we are unique. Come here and let's see if we can do something unique together. So, for example, one goal is a college access program and post-secondary program that is national, but they have started working with us specifically to both serve our current students, but also coach our college counselors and alumni counselors based on the model that they've seen working nationally. And we have built a stronger partnership with them, because we're like, cool, let's see this thing that you're not doing other places. We will be the test case for this because it serves our students. We also have a great partnership with a group called Boxing Out Negativity, which they were brought to us actually through a foundation that we already work with, a donor foundation, said, oh, we also fund this other group. Maybe you all should get together. And they come into our schools and they build relationships with our students, and then also hold peace circles and community circles with our students and support the bridging the gap between the community and our schools, and work with the principals on that. And then we also have another partnership with Volunteers of America again. So another national program that has decided that they will work with us, on the local level in our neighborhood. And that came from working with someone, meeting someone. You never know when you're going to make a connection, who happened to be on the board of Volunteers of America and said, oh, well, they're looking for a place to serve. I said, okay, great. And so then they actually wrote a grant that allowed for them to get clinical workers and social workers through their own organization that are now placed at our school specific for us. And it's worked out so well that now they're looking for other grants. And that kind of takes the lift off of us for the fundraising for it, the grant writing, and the staffing. And it's just truly a partnership of, here's what's working for us, here's maybe where we need to tweak this. And they're in constant contact with us about that.
One quick, maybe final operational question is, as you talk about some of these different programs, they all seem super unique and cool. And you've got national organizations trying to do things at the local level. You've got local organizations who maybe have worked with the school for a long time. Operationally, like, you all have 2 schools. You're not a massive network with unlimited resources. How do you think about, like, who owns partnerships? Is this you as kind of the executive, kind of managing some of these relationships? Or do you have specific teams in operations or external affairs? Or I guess I'm just curious, in terms of operationalizing these, like, when a really cool opportunity comes your way and you all decide this could bring a lot of value to our students, how do you actually think about, like, operationalizing that? Who owns that? What does that look like? How do you evaluate, do we have the time, energy, and effort to take this on?
That is such a great question, because what actually happened at the beginning, it was like everybody's got their own partnerships and relationships, and then you don't know what's happening, and somebody brings in somebody and you're like, oh no, but we already have somebody doing this. So just from, like, a straight operational standpoint, what I told everyone was all partnerships need to go through external affairs, and they all need to live with the grant writer. So we have a grant writer, and she doesn't manage every partnership, but part of her role, I guess, for anybody who's looking like, how are we going to do this? Because we don't have money for another role. And
Right.
When she knows what's going on and she can collect the data, so she's kind of the catch-all. Eventually, we need money for partnerships, right? If she has enough data, then she can write the grant or work with our grant partners to keep those alive. But also through her grant work, she's hearing often about, here's another partnership, here's another partnership. So she doesn't evaluate it, but if we have one person who has the catch-all for the data, then I am able to work with our principals to say, all right, time for an audit on what partnerships, is this one working? Kind of like what I said at the beginning, is this one working? Do we need an extra role for this? And where should we focus our fundraising? Especially if the partnership is not free. But if it's free and it's low lift on us, we typically say, yes, let's give it a try. But yeah, I think the grant writer, for anybody who's listening, is probably your best person, because if you need the money, eventually, if you need her to write a grant or them to write a grant, they're going to need that data anyway.
All right. I love it. Very tactical advice. We might need to do a follow-up episode sometime with your grant writer to talk about the process of gathering all the data and managing those relationships. But I appreciate the operational advice as we come to a close here. And Jemia, where should people go if they want to learn more about NLCP, if they want to connect with you, any sort of final resources or recommendations as it relates to today's conversation?
Yeah, nlcphs.org would be the best place. That stands for North Lawndale College Prep High School.org.
Love it. Awesome. All right. Well, Jemia, thank you so much for coming on today. Really enjoyed the conversation and appreciate the work that you're doing.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to Charter School Insider. This show is brought to you by BuyQ, the group purchasing organization specifically for charter schools. Want to learn how to maximize your school's purchasing power? Join together with thousands of other charter schools by visiting buyq.org/sign-up. BuyQ's purchasing program is free and has no obligations or commitments required. If you enjoyed today's episode, do us a favor and subscribe on your podcast listening platform of choice. If you have a question or feedback for us, we'd love to hear from you. Send us an email at podcast@byq.org. Thanks, and we hope you'll tune in for the next one.